So I'll start by introducing myself. So my name is Deanne Chapman, and I'm the State Director for Alaska Environment and Alaska Environment Research and Policy Center. And we believe in clean water and clean air and healthy lakes, rivers, oceans, and land, clean sources of energy that don't pollute and don't run out. And we think that's all the heritage that we should be leaving behind for future generations. So our staff do research on these types of issues. We educate the public and we work to win tangible results for a greener future. And over the past couple of years, along with our national partner and partners in other states, we've helped to win a historic package of bills that provide tax credits and rebates for renewable energy technologies that will help folks both reduce their energy costs while also reducing greenhouse gas pollution. I'm sure many of you also helped in that effort by signing petitions and talking to your elected officials and working within your community to make sure our leaders knew what we needed and what we wanted. So thank you for all of that. I'm excited today for us to talk about heat pumps. They're a really cool technology that help us more efficiently keep our houses warm in the cold and cool in the heat. And as our grids transition to more renewable energy, we need to also ensure that our homes are ready to use that clean energy for heat in addition to meeting our other energy needs. So that's my background in a nutshell. We've got a couple really excellent panelists with us today. We're going to first start hearing from Andy Romanoff, who's from Alaska Heat Smart. He's the executive director of Alaska Heat Smart, and he also sits on the board of Renewable Juneau and is the project director of the Juneau Carbon Offset Fund. Alaska Heat Smart's a 501c3 nonprofit org, and it works to reduce living cost and increase clean energy use in Alaska households. And they also offer numerous programs to educate and advise homeowners about heat pumps, what will work best for their specific home situation, how to put their new knowledge to work, and what financial incentives or assistance they may be able to access. So I'm going to hand it off to Andy to get us started, and then we'll move on to Dr. Tom Mersick and then on to Ethan Stoops. So take it away, Andy.
Thank you, Deanne. Really appreciate that. Great introduction. I guess I don't need to introduce myself because you did such a good job. So how's that look? Does that fill the screen for everybody? Yeah, so thanks for being here. Thanks for being here, folks. Again, Andy Romanoff, Executive Director, Alaska Heat Smart down here in sunny Southeast Alaska. It actually has been for 5 minutes now, so it's kind of exciting. Alaska Heat Smart, as Deanne said, 501c3, and we focus on education, consultation, and advisement for homeowners seeking to move away from fossil fuel heating and move towards renewable energy heating, or at least more efficient heating through the use of heat pumps. And so that's what we're here to talk about. And so let's just get right to it here. So I know Ethan has endured this show once before, so bear with me, Ethan. I know you're excited for a second round of it. But yeah, so essentially, there has been so much buzz and chatter and news over the last 6 months, 12 months, maybe 18 months or more that, if you have not, no offense to anybody here, but if you have not caught wind of all that exciting news, then you've probably had your head in the sand like this guy here. But endless media stories, endless media coverage about heat pumps these days. And we'll get to some of the reasons behind that. But anyway, a quick Google search for cold climate heat pump returned about 26 million different results, of course, which I did not go through, but there is a lot of information out there these days. And typically for many years, it's been a bottom-up sort of educational campaign for those involved. Word of mouth from homeowners who have actually embraced the technology, advertising campaigns by actual contractors and heat pump installers, and then occasional nonprofit organization running some sort of educational workshop like Renewable Juneau has done down here throughout Southeast for quite a few years. But so that's been the slow sort of progress of heat pump education. But today it's a totally different playing field. We now have all of that strong support from the bottom, but this incredible support from the top all the way up to the highest levels of our government, from the White House, really pushing heat pumps as a solution to climate action, to energy efficiency, to just home efficiency, to the point where I think it was last November, President Biden tasked the Department of Energy with a $250 million project utilizing the Defense Production Act to ramp up domestic production of heat pumps, part of which was intended to try and help the country of Ukraine wean itself off of Russian natural gas. And so all of a sudden, heat pumps are now more than just a great home heating device and a money saver, but a national security and energy resilience and an energy security tool. So lots of excitement there. So let's back up just a little bit. I'm going to assume that most folks here know a few things about heat pumps. I'm not going to get into the how they work, the why they work the way they do. I mean, there's so many things that we have in our homes that we don't quite understand, like the internet. How does that work? I have no idea, but it works and we love it. And when it breaks, we usually know who to call. And so, there's so much information out there. If you really want to understand how a heat pump works, there's loads of info out there on that. And I don't want to get lost in all those details. I basically just want to provide a sort of a finger on the pulse of the heat pump situation in Alaska, in our country, and across the globe. And so that's my intent here. But essentially, in brief, you can see here many pictures of a campaign that Alaska Heat Smart ran called Thermalize, and lots of outdoor units here. The piece that sits on the outside of the building that essentially captures the thermal energy from the air and moves that energy into a very cold refrigerant, which then is pumped into the house, sort of down lower center of the frame. You can see David Nash there standing on a ladder next to an indoor unit, and that's where the heat would come out. Again, a fan blowing across coils, pushing that heat out into the room, into the home. It's kind of like your refrigerator, but that's just doing the opposite thing, right? A refrigerator is a heat pump. So we all have heat pumps. You put your hand behind the refrigerator and it feels warm because that is thermal energy that's been pulled out of the refrigerator and it's coming out of the back of the unit. And so heat pumps are so incredibly efficient because they're not making any heat. They're just taking it from one place, moving it to another. And so you've got a couple of fans and a compressor, and that's it. And so they are 2 to 3 times more efficient than just your straight standard electric resistance baseboard heat. And if you have an oil boiler that's 80% efficient, then these things are just, they blow them out of the water. And so it's exciting to see that the United States is finally ramping up. We've got our foot on the accelerator, so to speak, at last, and we're moving ahead slowly. But in most of the world, it's old news. It's just kind of status quo. These things have been around for a long time, and many countries have embraced them in great part. Here on the left, we have a Chinese sort of apartment building. There's 25 heat pumps on the wall in this picture. On the right side, crooked picture, a Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia apartment complex. There's 80 heat pumps in this photo. I cropped out part of it on the right side, so there were actually 100 heat pumps on this building visible. And so these things are they're all over the place. Scandinavia, roughly 50% of all homes are using heat pumps to generate heat. And word from Japan is it's closer to 90% of homes using heat pumps. And I find it fascinating to see all the news on Ukraine on a regular basis. And almost every photo you see of buildings that haven't been leveled, you can see heat pumps on these structures. And I'm seeing them more and more, and I'm sure you are too, in advertisements and marketing and TV and commercials, and they're just kind of in there in the background. So so we're finally starting to play the game, starting to realize, hey, this is a good thing. So where is it all heading? What is the future of this still fairly young, at least in our country, industry? The International Energy Agency says that heat pumps are one of the few key technologies to play a major role in the fight against climate change, and also in the battle for energy security and energy independence in this country. Some trends in the United States will help illustrate that. In 2020, there were roughly 18 million heat pumps pumping heat, as contractors like to say, in the United States. And that's a 50% increase since 2015. So these are old old data sets in a way, 2015 being what, 8 years ago now. So if you are to extrapolate those numbers to today, we're looking at maybe 30 to 35 million heat pumps in operation in this country, generating heat. And so, things are speeding up. And last year's heat pump sales data indicates that fairly well. Over 4 million units were sold in the United States, which for the first time in history passed sales of natural gas furnaces. So that's pretty exciting. Many reasons behind that. Again, strong bottom-up support, new strong top-down support from the federal government. Increase in gas prices in many places is moving people to find more economic solutions, and of course, heat pumps are definitely that. And then technology. The technology has changed, and Tom will help guide us a little bit along that front. But these devices now work in much colder places than they did years ago, and they're able to, in many places, supply year-round heat. And thanks to numerous organizations around the country and around the state, such as, say, the Cold Climate Housing Research Center and National Renewable Energy Lab, Department of Energy. This technology continues to improve. And one sort of ironic piece of the technology component that I really enjoy is the fact that, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, that carbon dioxide has become one of the up and coming refrigerants used in these devices to capture the thermal energy and move it into the house. It really works well in colder places, especially up north in Alaska. And so I just think it's wonderful that we're starting to see the culprit, the bad guy, being put to work to become part of the solution. And I just like that a lot. So let's see more of that. Actually, there was just this big story today. I don't remember what publication, but there's this giant heat pump somewhere in Denmark that's running on carbon dioxide as a refrigerant, and it's gonna completely remove fossil fuels from an entire town. So I don't have that link. It's just came out today. So look for that if you want. Kind of fascinating news. So that's the sort of national trends. Statewide, at least we'll start down here in Juneau, where Alaska Heat Smart offers what we call our home heat pump assessment, where we gather utility data from a homeowner, we gather their electrical meter data, we do a home site visit where we analyze use and behavior of the spaces, and we generate options for that homeowner based upon their legacy heating systems, again, their behavior, their goals, and their utility usage, and come up with sort of impartial third-party options for what they can do, some solutions for them based upon that data. And so this just shows here that the increase in interest in our program, our assessment program, and part of this is just general awareness, because as more people use the program, more people become aware of it, they share that information with others, but it's rapidly sort of outgrowing our capacity, and we're making plans to deal with that capacity. We estimate here in Alaska's capital about 2,000 heat pumps currently in operation, and throughout the rest of Alaska's Panhandle, maybe 1,000 heat pumps scattered around the other communities. So this program is obviously successful. We feel it's successful. People seem to really like it. They tell us they like it. It's free, so the price is right, and it's exciting to see that now there are many other programs popping up across the country, doing similar work, similar solutions finding for homeowners to help them electrify their homes and save money and remove oil or natural gas or other fossil fuels from their homes. As well as these other programs that are popping up, 15 different states now have heat pump installation targets in place to help reach their climate and energy goals. And so it's rapidly becoming a kind of a common theme. So how do we continue to move the needle on this? Or maybe a better question is why do we need to continue to move the needle if all this is happening, if all this momentum is cranking along? We've got bottom support, top support, incentive programs, all this interest. Well, some of the programs that we've run have worked with consulting firms and other agencies that have performed surveys of either community members or program participants. And in conjunction with other surveys that we're aware of, roughly 40 to 50% of people surveyed still have never heard of a heat pump. Even with all these efforts underway and in place, there's still a lot of education to be done. And there's three primary barriers to heat pump adoption that programs like ours and many others are trying to overcome. And that is confusion, like this person is grappling with, and a lack of contractors, and then cost. The confusion piece comes with one, what's a heat pump? Two, is it going to work for me? Can I afford it? Well, I've already got a boiler and hydronic baseboards, or I've got a natural gas furnace, or I've got pellet stove, and I've got four of these systems. Right? It's really common in Alaska to have great redundancy in your heating systems. And so, wow, I'm going to grab a heat pump now and put that in. How is it all going to work together? Really, many people want to know all these things, and it's confusing. And so the need for education and advisement is never ending. And then a contractor situation, contractor lack, workforce development needs. I think we're probably all aware at all levels of our economy that people are hiring, people are looking for employees at every level, and that's very true when it comes to heat pump contractors and HVAC specialists and that sort of thing. And so there's a great need to get more people on board with this sort of work. And then cost, of course, is a big one. Everyone wants to know. It's one of the first questions. What's it going to cost me? What's going to save me? And that really depends a lot in part on what a homeowner's goals are. What are your goals? Is your goal to completely get off of fossil fuels? Is your goal to heat much of your house with heat pumps and not really worry about the other 20% for part of the year? Because of those goals and your intent in your house and your floor plan, you can be looking at anywhere from $6,000 to $30,000 of an investment. But we've learned down here that, of course, we have 100% hydroelectric electricity, so we're very lucky, and that's not always the case. But homes around this area save about $1,700 a year with installation of a single head air source heat pump. That's pretty substantial, especially if you're a lower to moderate income homeowner. So in addition to savings, there is all sorts of money out there for just about everybody, and Ethan will address some of that in a little bit with the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits and coming rebate programs. Many financial institutions now offer low-interest heat pump loans. There's all sorts of incentive programs. Chugach Electric throughout the rail belt is offering a $900 homeowner rebate for their heat pump project. Kodiak Island offers a $2,000 electrical credit off of future bills. Homer Electric Association, $500 rebate, not only to the homeowner, but a $500 rebate to the contractor who installs the unit. Alaska Heat Smart, we're offering $1,500 to $3,000 incentives for heat pumps, some of the highest in the state. Alaska Power and Telephone has rebates. See Alaska Corporation has rebates. There's lower income programs that offer free heat pumps if you qualify, be it from a carbon perspective or just a healthy homes perspective. So there's just lots and lots of money out there, which can really make these things pay off quickly and get you over that hurdle much more quickly than you thought you could. And so, I'm down here in Juneau, and heat pumps work great on the coast where we have a warmer, moister maritime climate, lots of thermal energy in our air. But the question always comes up: well, are they going to work where I am? Are they going to work in Dillingham? Are they going to work in Willow? Are they going to work in Chicken and Platinum and all these other places? And the answer is yes, they can. They can work. In this list of villages and towns on this slide, all feature numerous air source heat pumps and air to water heat pumps working to save money for much of the year. Not all of the year, but much of the year. We've determined that pretty much any oil burning home or facility will save money over the long term through the use of some form of heat pump. It almost always pencils out. It's a different story in the rail belt from the Kenai up to Fairbanks, where natural gas is prevalent. We've determined roughly that If you were to eliminate 80% of your natural gas load through the use of an air source heat pump, you probably will see an increase in overall annual heating costs by about 20%. And these are really rough numbers. But still, natural gas prices throughout much of the country are rising. They're forecast to rise in Alaska. There's lots of chatter out there about Cook Inlet and Hillcore and dwindling natural gas supplies. And along with those rumors are one that suggests that a 30% price hike could be coming in a number of years. And if that's the case, then, well, we're telling people, make your move now. There's limited contractor availability. Heat pump demand is just going to increase. The efficiency of these units is going to increase. They're going to get better and better. And if natural gas prices jump, you may want to get ahead of the curve now and not have to wait a year or more for the work to be done, especially when you can get a $900 rebate from Chugach and potentially a $2,000 tax credit and possibly some other monies. So lots of exciting stuff happening in the heat pump world, and more information available at these 3 websites as well as many others online. I know that Tom has lots of great information, so does Ethan. So yeah, with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Deanni. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate that. And if folks have follow-up questions about anything that Andy said, definitely feel free to put them in the Q&A in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end here. So next, we're going to hear from Dr. Tom Marsick, who is the Chief Scientist at NREL's Cold Climate Housing Research Center in Fairbanks, Alaska. And he also has a joint position with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where he serves as an Associate Professor of Sustainable Energy for the UAF Bristol Bay campus and Alaska Center for Energy and Power. So he's got lots of good insight for us. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Deanni, for the introduction, and thank you so much to Andy. That was an excellent presentation with lots of great information, and I'm going to try to build on that a little bit. So as Andy showed, there's a lot of momentum currently in heat pumps, not just in Alaska, but pretty much everywhere in the world. And in Alaska, we are starting to see heat pumps making sense in situations where they were not making sense before, and there are several reasons for that. One has to do actually with the war in Ukraine, like Andy pointed out. So now we have higher heating oil prices, and that makes the ratio of the electricity prices to the heating oil prices more advantageous, favoring heat pumps. Another reason is we have these rebates coming, and I know Ethan has lots of great information about the rebates coming. I look forward to his part of the presentation. And another one is that the technology is getting better, and the performance of the heat pumps is getting better. And that's the topic that I would like to focus on. I don't have a formal PowerPoint presentation, but I do have a few selected slides that I would like to share with you. So I'm gonna share my screen here. So what do we know about the performance of heat pumps in Alaska, and also touch on what we don't know? Where are the gaps that we are trying to address? So we did an evaluation of the field performance of heat pumps in Alaska back in 2014, 2015. Here's the map that shows the locations where we did the evaluations, and the ones with the orange squares. So that's in Dillingham, Juneau, and Wrangell. That's where we heavily instrumented the heat pumps, and we evaluated them in a great detail. And I wanna share some of the results from those detailed evaluations with you. So here's the summary of those results. On the x-axis, that's the outdoor temperature. On the y-axis, that's the coefficient of performance. So like Andy pointed out, the efficiencies of the heat pumps can be 200%, 300%, or even more. That's why we don't really call it efficiency, we call the coefficient of performance. So for example, the coefficient of performance is 3. That's the multiplier. So with the coefficient of performance of 3, what it means is that for every unit of energy you put into the heat pump in the form of electrical energy, you get 3 units of energy in the form of heat into your home. And it's because, you know, the 1 unit you put into the heat pump and it ends up in your home, but in addition to it, it extracts 2 units of energy from the outside environment and they end up in your home also. So you get 3 times more than what you put into it. So that's what the coefficient of performance tells you, that's the multiplier. And that shows how efficient the heat pump is. And in this study, we looked not only at the steady state coefficient of performance, but we looked at the integrated coefficient of performance also, which is the real life coefficient of performance. So this is the integrated coefficient of performance. I'll explain the difference between, you know, the integrated coefficient of performance and the steady state on this black and blue series here. That was an air-to-water heat pump in Juneau. And here, as you can see, kind of between the temperatures of, say, 40 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit, those 2 series are pretty aligned. So the black one is the integrated coefficient of performance, and the blue one is the steady state coefficient of performance. And the black dots are basically on top of the blue dots. And it's because in this temperature range, this heat pump operated in a steady state. But then what happens in the warmer temperatures is that now the heat load of the home is relatively low. And the heat pump, even at its lowest compressor speed, the heat rate, which means how quickly it's supplying the heat, is still too high. And the only way the heat pump can deal with it is by cycling. So it's turning on and off, on and off, on and off. And because of these cycles, the real life performance, so that's the integrated coefficient of performance, the black dots here, are significantly lower than the steady state performance. Now what happens, you know, here in the cold temperatures, roughly below 40 degrees Fahrenheit or so, so the coil, the outside coil of the heat pump needs to be colder than the outside environment. That's how it's extracting the heat from the outside environment. And because of that, there can be condensation on the outside coil. And if the temperature of the coil is below freezing, it's developing frost on the outside coil. And that's why every so often it needs to go into what we call the defrost. So it basically just reverses. There's a reversing valve inside, and instead of, you know, pumping heat from the outside and sending it to the inside, it actually takes a little bit of heat from the inside from your home and sends it to the outside to the unit to warm it up above the freezing point to melt the ice on the outside coil. And so every so often it goes into this defrost, which means as a result, the heat pump cycles. And because of the cycling, again, the integrated coefficient of performance, that's the black dots here, is lower than the steady state coefficient of performance. This is, by the way, one of the current areas of research is, you know, how to improve the algorithm of these defrosts, how to bring this black line closer to the blue line. So how to increase the integrated coefficient of performance. So in this study, we were focused on a few things, but one thing we noticed, even though it wasn't the goal of the study, and that relates to this series here, this green and red dots. This was a ductless mini split heat pump in Wrangell, Alaska, and what we noticed that with lower thermal loading of that heat pump, we saw that the coefficient of performance was increasing. So that would, you know, kind of suggest that, well, we should be, you know, oversizing the heat pumps so they don't run at its maximum capacity. So they are, you know, at a lower thermal loading than the maximum capacity. But we cannot quite make that conclusion because with this series here, these purple dots and blue dots, that was also a ductless mini split heat pump, this one in Dillingham, Alaska. We noticed the opposite. We noticed that with lower thermal loading, the coefficient of performance actually went down. So even though this wasn't one of the goals of the study, we happened to notice this, and that actually triggered a research question for a later study that I'm going to talk about in just a little bit, a lab study. But before I leave this slide, you know, I wanna look at, so what do these values actually mean? You know, the coefficient of performance. You know, coefficient of performance of 2, for example. So you already know that when you install a heat pump, you are going to reduce the consumption of fuel you use for heating your home. You know, it can be heating oil, it can be natural gas, it can be some other fuels. But at the same time, you're going to increase the amount of electricity you are using, because that's what the heat pump is using. And the electricity currently also, you know, typically comes from burning fuel in the power plant. So a logical question is, well, you know, what kind of coefficient of performance do we need. So we are really saving fuel, because if you use a heat pump in a situation where the amount of fuel that the power plant needs to burn is greater than just the fuel be burning on site to heat the building, then it doesn't make much sense to use the heat pump. And there's also the cost consideration. And so what kind of coefficient of performance you need really depends on the location. But just to kind of give you a point of reference, so I'm in Fairbanks, Alaska here. So in Fairbanks, the break-even point is the coefficient of performance of about 2. So with if you can use the heat pump in a situation and in a way that the coefficient of performance is greater than 2, you are saving money and you are saving the environment. If it's less, you are doing the opposite. So that kind of gives you the point of reference here. There is, by the way, an excellent tool that helps you evaluate what are the savings in your specific situation. I'm gonna put that one in the chat here. Actually, it's the Alaska heat pump calculator, heatpump.cf, heatpump.cf. I just put it in the chat here. So that's even though we don't have all the answers yet to the performance of heat pumps, this calculator is really an excellent tool that takes the information that we do to come up with the best estimate of how the heat pump is going to be performing in your specific situation. And so when you look at this graph here, in some situations like this, this municipal heat pump in Wrangell, you can see it's a very high coefficient of performance. So a heat pump in an appropriate situation, used in an appropriate way. Now, when you look at, these dots here, these, blue and purple dots, down here, it's a very low coefficient of performance. So in this situation, we're actually wasting fuel by operating the heat pump in this situation. So the goal obviously is to use the heat pump, in these situations like here, not in situations like here. And that's this calculator, this heatpump.cf helps you evaluate, in which situation it makes sense, and in which situations it doesn't make sense to use the heat pump. So I mentioned that with the field study, there were some questions triggered about how the heat pump behaves with different levels of thermal loading. And so we recently finished a study. It was a lab study done in 2021, 2022, where we monitor the performance of 4 ductless municipal heat pumps in a cold chamber with this specific goal. And what we found, the summary is here on this graph here. So on the y-axis, there's the coefficient of performance. On the x-axis, that's the thermal loading. So what we found that, if you have the heat pump at the maximum thermal loading and you start decreasing the thermal loading, the coefficient of performance goes up. So that would kind of suggest, that if you oversize the heat pump and it doesn't run at its full capacity, you are going to get a greater coefficient of performance. But then as you go further and we are further decreasing the level of thermal loading, the coefficient of performance goes down. So if you overdo it, on oversizing the heat pump, then you are going to achieve the opposite effect. So this is a shape of a curve here that unfortunately is such that we don't have direct guidelines now. We cannot say you should be undersizing or oversizing. As you can see, you want to size the heat pumps just right. And this triggered new research projects that we're initiating. This is all based on the steady state coefficient of performance, but we really need to know the integrated coefficient of performance to be able to provide better guidelines on things like sizing air source heat pumps. So this graph here on the right, it reflects the graph on the left, where the blue dots are the coefficient of performance at the maximum level of thermal loading, and the orange dots are at the level of thermal loading that's close to the maximum efficiency. So it'll be close to this peak here. And you might be getting a lot more detail here than you need about the current research projects. But the main message of this is there is a lot of research going on in heat pumps with the goal of improving the performance of the heat pumps. So if you're in a situation now that maybe heat pump doesn't quite make total sense in your specific situation yet, stay tuned. Don't give up on heat pumps, because chances are that in the future they are going to be making sense in those situations also. And just my last slide. here, when we talk about heat pumps to save energy, I can't resist to emphasize that we shouldn't forget about other things we can do to save energy, because obviously the biggest savings can be achieved with a system approach when you combine a heat pump with other energy efficiency measures. And just as an example, this is a home in Dillingham, Alaska, that's using a heat pump. You can see the heat pump installed here. Here's a close-up of that. That's the outdoor unit. This is the indoor unit, but this home also has an extremely efficient building envelope. It's extremely insulated, it's extremely airtight, it's using heat recovery ventilation, and the heating bill for this home is just a few $100s annually in Dillingham, Alaska, so a very small fraction of what other homes pay for heating annually in Dillingham, Alaska. So this is just to show what kind of savings can be achieved when you combine a heat pump with other energy efficiency measures. And I'm gonna stop with this, and I really look forward to Ethan's portion on the rebates that are coming. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That website looks super helpful as well. I'm going to put it in the chat so everyone can see it there. We are now going to pass it over to Ethan Stoops, who is the Program Information Manager at the Research and Rural Development Department at the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. And AHFC, sorry, I'm bad at saying letters in a row, will be administering the rebate programs for heat pumps, electrification, energy efficiency retrofits, and weatherization programs for the Inflation Reduction Act. Which will be coming up soon, and he'll talk about that. And we have a series of webinars that we're going to be doing over the next couple of months that will cover some of those other things that you can do with your homes as well. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Ethan.
Thank you, Deanna. Thank you, Tom and Andy. Great presentations. Let me my screen sharing there. Did that work? Here we go. Okay. So as Deanna said, Ethan Stoops, Program Information Manager, Research and Rural Development Department at AHFC. AHFC is an independent state agency created in 1971, charged with providing access to safe, quality, and affordable housing for Alaskans, primarily through mortgage financing. In 1992, the Alaska State Housing Authority and the State Alaska Department of Community and Regional Affairs were merged into AHFC. That brought public housing and rural loan and energy programs into the variety of state housing services that AHFC provides. And my department, Research and Rural Development, is responsible for many of the programs that originated back then. So we do state weatherization program, supplemental housing development grant program, working with the regional housing authorities, home energy rating system, building codes, the ARIS database, consumer education. And one of the things we did is we administered the state energy program that ran from 2008 to about 2016 that many people may remember, and has some similarities to one of these two rebate programs that's coming up. And so where do these programs come from? I think Andy touched on it briefly. The Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed in the fall of 2022, pledged $370 billion in total investments in clean energy solutions over, I think it's well over 100 different programs across many different federal agencies in all sectors of the economy. These two particular ones are run through the Department of Energy, through their relatively new state and community energy programs office at the federal level, and then they'll be coming through us to administer on the state level. So that's kind of the background. The timeline, this is the Department of Energy's timeline. It's from a month or two ago, but it's still mostly accurate. So starting at the beginning of the year, they had some public webinars, some listening sessions. They put a request for information out that all 50 states and the territories could respond to. Ours were primarily asking for as much flexibility in administering the program as they would allow us. You know, Alaska's a big state, lots of off-road communities, lots of rural communities. You know, we wanted to be able to adjust the program as much as we could to make it work here. You know, it works in California, Nebraska, New York, probably is not going to work here, or may not work as well. And then the full framework, you could see on here, they say the full program guidance, their target date is July 1. That's already kind of moved till mid-July. So that's the next big stage we're waiting for. So once that comes out, they release the full program guidance. then we can start writing our state program, which will then have to submit back to them for their review, their approval. There'll probably be some back and forth. Once we get full approval, then they'll release fundings and we can go live with our program. They had their anticipated, their hope for date to get their first initial funding out is November. I think that's pretty optimistic. I'd be surprised if that happens. So we're kind of looking at probably end of first quarter or second quarter 2024 for these rebate programs to go live. That's, you know, maybe conservative, but I wouldn't be surprised if DOE doesn't get funding out until first quarter 2024. So that's kind of the timeline. That's where we are. They do have their rolling application for early admin funds. We're in the process of that. We're trying to get some of those released early so we can have, bring on some more personnel and just be prepared for when these programs go live. So that's the timeline. And then the first one is the home electrification and appliance rebates. This is previously known as the High Efficiency Electrification Rebate Act, or HERA. So if you saw that name, this is the same thing. They've kind of changed what they've called it. This is the one that's got the heat pumps in it. So this covers purchase and installation of a range of appliances and electrification upgrades, including heat pumps, including heat pump clothes dryers, including heat pump water heaters. So the way it works, these are income dependent rebates that are intended to be point of sale. So homeowners don't have to come out of pocket for these costs. These should come right off either at the retail or with the contractor, depending on how it works. So for a household that's 80% or less of area median income, 100% of the cost up to these amounts. So if you're buying a heat pump and it was $10,000 fully installed, if you were 80% or less area median income, you'd get 100% up to $8,000. So you get $8,000 off. If you were in the next income bracket, which is 80 to 150% of area median income, you'd get 50% off. So of your 8,000, you'd get 5,000, or of your 10,000, you get 5,000 back. Unfortunately, households above 150% can't take advantage of these, and the total cap for all of them is 14,000. If you add them all up, it's about 20,000 in total rebates. So you can't take advantage of all of them. You have to pick and choose, but that's basically what it is. So there's some other things that we're waiting on more direction from them for. Obviously, some of these will be through a contractor, some of these will be through a retailer. You know, your electric range or oven, that would be direct from a retailer, whereas your heat pump or your electric load service center would be through a contractor. We're waiting for DOE guidelines so we can start figuring out exactly how that'll work, how income verification will work. We're trying to make that we want that to be as quick and smooth as possible. Department of Energy has kind of hinted they may be providing some help in that, possibly. It certainly would be nice if they had rolled something out that everyone could take advantage of, so all 50 states wouldn't have to create their own. But that's unclear for now. So this is the first one. This is the one with the heat pump. So it's up to $8,000 depending on your income. And then we'll move on to the next one. So the home efficiency rebate program. This is the one that's sort of similar to the state rebate program that was from 08 to 16. These are whole home retrofit packages based on the reduction in home energy use. It's modeled savings. So we'll start with an energy assessment. An energy rater come to your house, do an assessment, provide you with an energy efficiency improvement options report that would list steps you could take to improve the efficiency of your house. Along with the previous one was based on star, we had the 6-star plus. This one's a percent, so we have to adjust it a little bit, but it should give you what your improvement options are and about what percent savings you should get. You can look at that. You can look at the rebate amount, decide what makes sense for you, move forward, do your retrofits. Then you have an energy rater come back, do your assessment, and then see where you went on your percent of savings. This one is also income dependent, but it doesn't have a hard cap like the appliance one does. So LMI, lower median income, and this is 80% of area income, that it doubles the amount of the rebate and gives you up to 80% project costs as opposed to 50% of project costs. And this one does have a big component for multifamily. You can see 2,000 up to 8,000 per unit, depending on how it shakes out. So there's that one. The one thing about this is you can't count the same improvement under both. So if you did get a heat pump under the electrification and appliance one, if you got that credit, you could not then use that as part of your retrofit package. So you can only count it one time, not on both. There's also a measured savings component for this, where you would have, you'd have to work with your utility. You'd have 12 months of your utility ratings going back. You do your retrofit and then go 12 months forward to make sure you got the savings. We didn't have that as part of the state one program last year, so not sure that that'll be part of this. It's part of the federal one. We may have a part of that, but it's a little more complicated. And it's just such a long ask for people to do your retrofit and then wait a whole 12 months before you get your rebate back. It's a big ask, so a little unclear on that, how that'll work. So that's pretty much those two. Right now, until the full guidelines come out, we don't know a lot more than what DOE has publicly stated. There's just not much more than this. We know what the rules are, what the regulations are, as far as what the amounts are and the percentages are. But I mean, we have a ton of questions about how the actual administration will go. And we're hoping for those guidelines, because then we'll know what we have to follow, and we can start working on how it'll work for Alaska. The other one I did want to mention, I think Andy mentioned it briefly. I didn't put it on here because it's not ours, but there is the 25C home energy residential tax credit, which will give you 30% up to $2,000 on a heat pump. That one is live now, so if you can't wait till next year, if you want to go now, you can take advantage of that one right now. This is the website, or will be the website. I'm not actually sure it's live today. Eventually we'll have a standalone website, but once this is live, you can put your email in, and we'll start sending out updates once as the program takes shape. I didn't want to go too much longer because I wanted to leave some time for questions, and I think I'll cut it there, Gianni, if that's good.
Perfect. Okay, great. And then just with that last thing that Ethan said, I'll add in that folks who are over 150% of area median income are eligible for that tax credit, as anyone who has tax liability. So
that is correct. Yeah, that one is not income dependent. So.
Yeah, cool. So we'll go ahead and dive into questions now. And we'll go ahead and start. The first question is about whether heat pumps work with radiant floor heating. And we can sort of have anyone take that, and I also can take that if that's helpful.
Yeah, I can start off with that. Yeah, there are definitely heat pump systems that work with radiant floor heating. We see the demand for those frequently with the phone calls and the outreach that we see on a regular basis. And there are quite a few systems here in Southeast that gather heat, thermal energy in the outdoor compressor and move it into water, and then purpose that either for heating or even domestic hot water usage. And for a new construction, it makes a little more sense. It's a little more cost effective, often between $18,000 and say $26,000 for that system, which isn't cheap, but people do like their radiant heat. And for a retrofit situation, it often can be a little more money than that, sometimes pushing up to 30, depending on the home and depending on the square footage of the radiant floor or radiant floors. A little more complex to switch over to that, but it does happen. There are devices made in Eastern Canada. They're increasingly common, Nordic and Arctic heat pumps that we're seeing used more and more. Quite often a solution that we're seeing is a combination of actually, at least where electricity rates are fairly low, is the use of an electric boiler for much of the radiant heat or a peripheral room heating, and then a heat pump, air source heat pump, to take the bulk of the load. There are air to water systems used up in northern Alaska. Most of those villages that I had on the slide that had the state of Alaska on it. I think Tom is probably familiar with these systems, the carbon dioxide air to water systems. Quite successful in many cold places. Many of these up in Ambler, Northwest Arctic Borough, where they're functioning down about -20 or more and heating water to about 145 degrees and providing heat all year round in these really cold places. And so, yeah, they're out there, and it is possible.
Wow.
I'm just gonna add to it. Thank you, and that was great. I'm just gonna add kind of the cold climate perspective to it. So just keep in mind that in the colder parts of the state, you wouldn't be able to rely on the heat pump only. So say when it's 40 below, there is no heat pump on the U.S. market currently that could be functioning in those temperatures. So when you're thinking of this, even if it's a new construction, you're thinking, well, heat pump, the air to water is expensive, but I'm gonna say by not having to purchase the other heating appliance, it's not necessarily true in the colder parts of the state, because you still need to have the backup that's going to be providing heat for you when it's really cold outside. So just wanted to emphasize that aspect of that.
Another question is about whether geothermal heat pumps are feasible here in Alaska.
I'd say yes, they are definitely feasible. We have many here in Juneau, many large facilities, swimming pools, libraries. The entire Juneau airport is ground source heated. There's a couple dozen homes that have ground source heat pumps. Yeah, they used to be much more common, and in other parts of the state, I know there's some in the Mat-Su. They used to be more common when the air source heat pumps were not as effective, when they were not as efficient. And because a ground source heat pump will take thermal energy from the ground, which tends to be fairly stable on an annual basis, and you can draw that heat month after month without much difference. And then it becomes more of an issue of what Tom was referring to about the efficiency of your home and the thermal envelope of your home and how well it holds that heat. But in our experience, as the air source heat pumps and their efficiency has improved, the price point of those has come down relative to ground source units. So ground source is quite expensive, much more invasive, requires a lot of digging, a lot of wells and whatnot, and it's much more complicated. But for those who have them, I know they really really enjoy it, but it's invasive, and it's quite cost prohibitive for many.
Thank you, Andy. And just to add a cold climate perspective to it, so the ground source heat pump can provide heat all year round. So that's one of the advantages of the ground source heat pumps, that the ground is staying relatively warm compared to the air, that the heat pump can still function to extract the heat from the ground. So there is the trade-off. So the summary of the trade-off is that, yeah, the ground source provides heat all year round, but the initial cost is very significantly higher than the initial cost for the air source heat pump, which cannot provide heat all year round in the colder parts of the state. But again, it has a significantly lower initial cost, and that's why currently we have seen a lot of interest in those air source heat pumps because of the significantly lower initial cost.
So now there's a handful of questions that all sort of center around the same thing, but people are curious how many watts it takes to run a heat pump for a 1,500-foot square home or a 2,000-foot square home, and then just like what they can expect cost-wise, which I think is kind of a complicated question. But if folks can take a stab at some of that.
That is a complicated question. It's complicated because no two homes are the same. You can have a 1,500 square foot home like mine, which is very open. Airflow moves easily from one space to another. Or you can have a 1926 home with tiny little rooms and hallways, and it's the same square footage, but it's going to be much harder to heat with a simple air source heat pump system. But on average, again, like I said, for at least Southeast hydro communities, we're seeing an annual heating bill reduction of about $1,700 as compared to oil. And roughly you could say that the addition of an air source heat pump in many places lowers your heating bills by between 50 and 75%. But of course, that depends on so many things. What's your electrical rate? What's your oil cost? What's your natural gas cost? What's your home like? There is, it's a complicated thing, and that's why we have developed our assessment program, because there is really no one answer. Complicated.
So is sort of the answer to that question is that folks should talk to a contractor or to another program that does an assessment in their area to get an idea of what costs would be?
Yeah, ideally contractors will look at it that way, but they often do not to diss on any contractors, but
Mhm.
some of the standard formulas for sizing heat pumps are grossly inaccurate and very ineffective in achieving homeowner heating goals. So I think if an assessment program is not available, typically an audit program is, and we greatly stress the use of an energy audit to get a better sense of what the design heating load is of a home, what the energy use intensity may be for that space, and then what is recommended.
Well, that's super helpful. So I feel like there's a lot of questions that folks had about just whether it would work, and talking to for your specific home and talking to an energy auditor seems to be the best thing there.
And I'm just going to draw
Um,
attention back to the heat pump
yeah.
calculator. So the heatpump.ci, because it was developed exactly for this purpose. So, there are, like Andy said, there are a lot of other factors besides just the square footage of the home. And this calculator is a pretty amazing tool where you enter those factors about your home, what the kind of building envelope and insulation and such. And it comes up again with the best estimate we currently can based on the data that we have about how much energy that heat pump is going to be using in your home and how much energy it's going to be saving for you. So I think it's a good starting point if you want to evaluate if a heat pump is going to make sense for you. In addition to, of course, conducting Alaska Heat Smart that can provide a lot of additional value that calculator cannot. So the calculator just goes based on numbers you put into it, but Alaska Heat Smart is going to ask you a lot of other questions that make sense in your situation to help you evaluate if it makes sense for you.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you, Tom. Essentially, we have taken that calculator and modified it about 36 times to customize it for our region and our homeowners. But yeah, thank you for that plug.
wow. And I just put in the chat the link to that tool again. So that's super exciting. Cool. We've just got another minute or so. So let me see if there's any other questions. So it seems that the other question that's coming up, which I think is a good one to address, is sort of around finding contractors, who are contractors. And I know that that's a big conversation that we've been all having. So I wanted to see just what folks had to say about that.
That, I would say, is a work in progress. Contractors are lacking. We know that they're out there. Those that are currently working are extremely busy. Alaska Heat Smart and others are starting to begin work on a statewide database of contractors. So we're slowly accumulating information on who's doing what and where and what areas they serve. And we have a ways to go. We have a long ways to go on this, but it is slowly coming together. And for right now, for the current time being, you can call us at Alaska Heat Smart, and we can share with you what we currently know. But again, it's a work in progress.
I would say for HFC, for specifically the electrification and appliance rebates, because those will have procedures that have to be followed. I would imagine at some point we will have a list of contractors that have agreed to those, and that would probably be a good place to start. So that will be coming at some point too. But Andy's an excellent resource in the interim until that's up and running, or even when it's up and running probably.
Well, one other thing that I would just add in there is that we've heard from a lot of different folks that a lot of contractors for this and for other electrification work are booked pretty far out. And so encourage your friends to become electricians. And then I'm not actually joking when I say that, although it sounds a little funny when I say it like that, but it's true. And then the other thing that I would say is that taking time to plan out the different things that you want to do in your house and having a slightly longer term plan is worthwhile, because it will probably take you a little bit of time to actually get someone into your home to do the work. So start doing your planning now. Well, so if we did not get to your question, I will compile a list of frequently asked questions from this webinar and from another one that my partner organization did nationally. And I'll get those out to folks with answers to questions that we didn't get to. And definitely feel free to email me if you have additional questions that come up as well, and I'll try to get answers for those too. And I really appreciate all of you for attending, and thank you so much to all of the panelists, such great information. And this was recorded, so I'll send it out to everyone as well, so you can go back to certain segments if you felt like you didn't quite understand the first time or want to review some information too. Cool. Any last parting words before we wrap up?
I just think it's really exciting to see all this interest in heat pumps. So I want to say thank you very much to all the participants, and of course, thank you to Andy, Ethan, and you, Deanne. Thank you.
Of course. Well, I hope you all have a lovely rest of your evening. And thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ethan and
Bye.
Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, Deanne.